Good evening. It's very bright. Good evening and welcome to the May Master of Fine Arts reading. On behalf of all the faculty who teach creative writing in our department, John Dalton, Mary Troy, Shane Seeley, Drusilla Wall, Glenn Irwin, Catherine Dwiggins, and myself, Steve Schreiner, thank you for coming. This is a culminating event in the career of MFA students, and we're very eager to hear them read tonight. We who help train writers feel very lucky because we consider writing an honorable pursuit. Everyone knows someone who wants to be a writer. Why is that? Your answer is as good as mine, but I'll venture a guess. I think it is because of the connection between creative writing and truth. Out in the world, truth feels slippery, but the writing of poems, stories, novels, essays is and always must be truthful. Otherwise, it's propaganda or advertising. Wherever MFA students are, or where they go, there is a kind of light they bring with them, or seek to gather around them. The light is the urge to be truthful and to learn everything they can about crafting their truth. If that sounds like a contradiction, it should not trouble anyone. Art is what we are studying here. Art is also truth, one that we filter through us so that it comes out bearing our perspective. The workshop, the pursuit of the MFA, serves the purpose of purging our perspective for the largest possible group of thoughtful people to recognize and regard. Tonight you'll hear 6 very talented truth-tellers. Poets and writers around the world, sometimes accused of corrupting readers, have at times been banned. Writing is dangerous, whether it's incendiary or not. It raises questions in our minds, celebrates the individual, and in its own way, instructs. MFA students, thinking through what life is like, and perhaps why it is, are busy working for us all. We owe them our attention. Here to introduce our first reader is poet Shane Seeley.
Good evening. One of the pleasures of this evening, aside from the obvious ones, is seeing people who've graduated come back. I'm really happy to see so many. Stacy Walker's poems locate themselves on boundaries. Land and sea, past and present, you and I. The boundary is a paradox, at once the point of union between two bodies and the delineation of one from another. Stacy's poems know this paradox well. The lovers who, quote, slept in the same bed and never kissed and never blinked an eye are its very illustration. The distances between them bind them. People in Stacy's poems would, if they could, merge completely, eradicating the boundaries between them. Quote, I once said I would breathe for you, says the speaker in Shipwrecks. But of course she can't, and they can't. The closer we get to each other, the more we are aware of our separateness. A wife might know her husband's story so well that his pain becomes hers, but that shared pain might well isolate them from each other. When a woman finds a shoe left behind by an old lover, he comes back to her in memory and imagination. When a woman enters her husband's family home, she finds the, quote, matte finish smile of his sister, dead more than 20 years, an absence which continues to shape the family she has joined. and thus the boundary between the present and the past distorts, and what seemed far away is both immediately close and painfully out of reach. If what's past lives in the present, and if your stories are also mine, then what are the boundaries that define us? That's the central, unresolvable question in Stacy's thesis, A Letter to the Universe. Are sex and love ways that we lose ourselves or ways that we become ourselves? Does loss bring us closer to that which we lose? Do our relationships with those closest to us efface us, or do they create us? We await the universe's answer to these questions. In the meantime, we have the solace of Stacy's poems. Stacy Walker is the winner of the 2015 Graduate Poetry Prize for her group of poems, and that's how the story goes. She writes and teaches in St. Louis, where she lives with her husband and apparently fairly rambunctious son. Please join me in welcoming Stacy Walker.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, yes, you can. Okay, first off, I want to thank the faculty in the graduate department, John Dalton, for giving me that call 3 years ago that helped give me this adventure, for Mary Troy for always advocating for me and my husband, and for Steve always making me feel good about my poems and inspire me to do more, and Shane for always challenging me to do better. So thank you. I think I said this in my defense, and I firmly believe this. Helen Keller said that life is a daring adventure, nothing at all. And so I'm glad I chose the daring adventure. And two of my most greatest adventures are my husband, Kent, and my son, Adam. And I also want to thank my parents, because they're watching him tonight, and my mother desperately wanted to be here. But without their help and their time and their devotion, I don't think any of this would be possible for myself nor my husband. So with that, I will begin. This is the first poem that I decided to open up my manuscript with, and I thought it was appropriate to open it up here. Pockets for risk. I reach down to my change, the quarter of things, a piece of 8, a piece of you, that time you told me you didn't love me, that time you let a man fuck you to feel anything, that time you bloated your pancreas and almost died, that time you wrote letters in Iraq to your imagined children because you knew you were going to die, and when you didn't, you thought no one would love you because you ate too much sand and you were a killer. That time you cried on my shoulder in the alley in the rain, that time we smoked tobacco pipes and talked about the rats and the wall and drank wine at Molly's and slept in the same bed and never kissed and never blinked an eye and never stopped and never let go and went full speed ahead on my birthday in my bed in August in my house, that you never left. If I check all my pockets, I know you are there near the outside of my hip, in the side pocket where you slid your hand once in December to keep it warm, and once in June where you hid your pen, where the tip bled on my thigh, where you are tattooed, where you kissed me that night I told you about our son. If I could slip you in my pocket, it would be the back one. If I could hold your picture, it would be the one where you smile in brown, green, and sun, where your eyes are blue, where you can't see the gun, the watchtower, Fallujah, where the war never happened and you never signed on the line, where your sister didn't die, didn't get hit by some drunk on some road on some early morning drive home. I reached down to my change, the quarter of you, in 2 times you left and came back, in 4 trips to Chicago and 5 nights in New Mexico. In the 25 times we walked along the river, I will keep this quarter of love. I will keep my hands ready, your wet tongue a possibility, my fingers a possibility. I taste the small line of your hips. I am your middle name. We are magic spells. Like Cinderella is a possibility. Like stardust is a possibility. like wishing is a possibility. On wholeness, you wear your body as if without the surface of the earth, like you could explode at any moment, like a burst of tectonic asteroids moving up to space in the opposite direction of gravity, like the way water evaporates off hot pavement, like the way smoke can rise off a flame. On the surface, we were too much. We would never have met, but you were the unfolded order and I enfolded. And if I hadn't been reading Bohm, and if I hadn't been writing a letter to the universe, then I wouldn't have noticed the way you walked in to speak to me, the way your body reached out to hold mine. This imperfect. I drive by this apartment on my way home, the window big and blank and bare, stark yellow light greets my eyes. In the 10 o'clock dark, Elvis swings his legs to the seconds. He is the only object to exist in that space, on that wall, smiling at me in the night on the road, and so the world kills me, literally. I sit down to write about it and how every day we are at war and guns are on fire and animals flee their homes, about how men are beaten, about how women are battered, about how children are drowned and bitten and how we are all left abandoned and kittens with their heads cut off and puppies cleaned in dishwashers. And what I wrote was, I love you. The world doesn't have enough of these. I don't have enough of these, haven't given enough of these. I sit down and try to write about something more, about how love and faith and hate are our bombs tied to children and women and used as animals to soak the world in blood. And when I write passion, I think of you. I love you. How I want to blow sweet bombs all over your body, and my pen sprouts fireworks and marks the sky out in your constellation, and I hate myself for it. I love you so much. I once stood by and watched you chase other women, offered you advice on what to do so you could get rid of love too. I was your third wheel date on Chinese night. I was the phone a friend when you needed directions to impress that girl you once dated in high school, to impress that girl who was reading some book, to impress that girl who is gardening, making potato boxes, to impress that girl who is taking pictures, who was cute and blonde and not single, who later told me you tried to kiss her. To impress that girl who paints, who is also cute and brunette and engaged, who you said they won't last, who is now married 5 years. I love you so much, this becomes my agenda. I love you so much, this isn't a poem about breast cancer, lung cancer, ovarian cancer, testicular cancer. I love you so much, this isn't a poem about genocide and war and religion. I love you so much, this isn't a poem about ending capitalism, starting a revolution, smashing gender roles, stating the obvious. It's a poem about how I stare at the window of a stranger and watching Elvis swing his plastic hips to seconds, to minutes, to hours, to days, to tell you, to be next to you, because kittens and puppies and babies are all about making the world a little more perfect. Because when I come home, when I close the door and I think of Elvis and time and it's you and me and our son, the world is a little more perfect. Raw. I want to burn my husband's face, melt his nose and pop his eyes, watch his mouth run and drip like candle wax until he is a blister, a scab that I can peel and destroy and open again every time he needs to write his story about the war or his dead sister or how he used to be free of me and our son. He needs to be alone. He needs to go. He needs to play single guitar in the past. I think of this when he asks if I'm upset with him. I always answer no, because I hurt for him, because his family stopped after Audrey died, because he is raw. He once told me before we were married his body was important to him, that he couldn't use it on me, waste his love if he didn't love. The river was high and cold in the sun. It was muddy. It was morning. I drove him home and let him cry like I let him write and hope he finds his story like I know mine. When he asked, "How are you so sure?" and hope he comes back like I did 4 days later when he said he made a mistake. Like asking Jane to marry him 2 years before, like smoking pot and turning his liver black and setting his car on fire and sleeping with those girls and kissing those men and passing on herpes to Claire and firing that gun to kill. Now I remember he is already burning. I hope I'm doing okay on time. I'm a little scared. Audrey. I say your name, and those sounds hover in the air. It is open and heavy in my mouth. Even the syllables sound like ghosts. I say your name with reservation because how can I claim you? I cannot command you. A matte finished smile in my husband's childhood home, a tradition of senior photos, a tradition of a once family, a once person. I only have you in that flat moment, creamy skin and feathered strawberry hair. You stand to the right, near the corner at the front door, always in my periphery as I enter. I cannot say I know you, recognize your voice in that house, and know you are there, but I am haunted. My husband whispers secrets of your life around me, the guilt your father feels knowing his daughter had been dead for 3 days before finding out. Audrey, my husband was 13 when you abandoned him, when he was abandoned for grief by your parents. They never came back to him, and you never came back either. He is always lost. His eyes hold fear like he does our newborn son. Where are you in moments like these? When he is wild on instinct, when he is overcome with the new, we are like bombs he needs to run away from. He needs to find safety. Sometimes he says, I want to go back, and I know he means all the way back to you. Audrey, do you hear your brother call you in panic? He wishes you alive, but I hate to tell him it isn't possible, how your life beyond 30 was never possible. But now, here you are, a phantom every time I walk in and out of our house. How you follow me, how you stand in every corner watching us, and how I, too, call your name and want you real again. Okay, well, I want to read just a little bit more. I have this index at the back of that I created, and I don't know what other to call it than an index, and I think that everybody has their own indexes, and they always change, and we have multiple things that we catalog. And so for the speaker of this manuscript, this is her index. And I just want to read a couple of little moments in her index for you. So this is part of the B's. It's called Biscuit. When you told my mom my nickname was Biscuit, you were sitting in the back seat. My mom was in the front. We had just eaten lunch. It was 1:16. I could see you smiling in the rearview mirror. This one is under the I's for Indianapolis. What you classify as our first adventure together, where we stayed in our first hostel, where I introduced you to the head and the heart, where you introduced me to Stella Artois, where we smoked our pipes and walked the back alleys to see the graffiti, to see what would happen in the dark. This is N, New Year's Eve. We drove to Arkansas for Alex, became failed superheroes, drank gin and tonics, ate waffles and cheese, bought Diane Warkowski's Emerald Ice at a used bookstore on Dixon. It was published in 1988. It was such a good year. And then I will read one more poem, and then you'll be done with me. Reading the Signals. A guy reads his newspaper, March 14th. His hat reads latitudes and attitudes. And I think of water. I think of our tides, our spring and neap were never compliments. I suppose his hat has something to do with sailing, and it fits the mood I am in, being left adrift. I do not know how to sail, and my latitude unknown, but I am learning. I am some mysterious nautical flag, the red diamond on white. I am disabled, disabled, disabled. I am the Juliet flag, blue and white and blue and on fire, but I am learning. There are people right now getting what they want. There are people right now reading the water and maps and knowing how to move. Tell me it will be better. I want latitudes and platitudes. I don't think I understood how much this man overboard changed my landscape. I am reshaped. I move like the echo and India. Keep clear, I'm about to sail. You told me to be me, but this topography is different. It is blue and yellow as I try to communicate with water and sun and moon. I am this bright kilo. All of this and the shape of the beach, the coastline, the angle of the seabed leading up to land and the current. Yes, yes, yes. I fly my Sierra. The blue in white surrounded by white. I am about to sail. The white in blue surrounded by blue. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mary Troy, and I have the privilege of introducing Matt Vivian. Imagine this: a teenaged boy with a brother in jail for drugs. A teenage boy with a mean and stupid father who falls down the stairs and becomes addled and in need of care for the remainder of his life. With a brother-in-law who steals all the family's savings and for this crime is killed by the brother who was in prison. With a mother who ignores all this and instead focuses on her housekeeping concerns. With a niece who, even as a toddler, is happy to leave the family behind when she gets a chance. And with a dog who has been killed by a strange beast roaming the hills and valleys of the Missouri backwoods where this story takes place. Matt Vivian has imagined such a place and has described it for you in his story, Acapulco County, runner-up for the Graduate Fiction Prize this year. Matt hasn't merely given you a view of this world that makes it real and powerful, but most amazing of all, he has given the main character, the teenage boy, the intelligence and skills not only to survive, but to be better than his past, to see and to learn. Matt has made this story one of hope. It's what Matt does, with detailed, precise descriptions that allow us to inhabit the worlds he creates. And his range is not just backwoods drugs and hopelessness. His thesis included a really good story about an older woman whose husband is suffering from dementia and the effort she expends to save him from himself. And another featured a young child who, on a Boy Scout campout, sees his father for the first time the way others see him. Even after defending his thesis, Matt is not resting on his laurels. He's not taking a break after concentrated years of work, but he's already working on a new novel about murder in a high school. Well, he may know something some of us don't. Before he entered our MFA program, he was a high school teacher. While here, Matt was a teacher again, but this time he taught college students composition and fiction writing, and by all accounts, including mine, did a terrific job. Tonight, though, we celebrate him as a writer. Please welcome Matt Vivian.
All right. Thank you, Mary, for the lovely introduction. And thank you, all of you, for being here. I appreciate it. So, first of all, I got to thank my three. I got to thank God for making me, Jesus for saving me, and then my mother for raising me. My mom's an angel, and if she hadn't taken me to the library and during the summers so that I could read, if she hadn't sat down and made me do my homework, when my pencil was too heavy or I had migraines at age 7, I wouldn't be able to write the way that I can. So thank you, Mom. Second, I got to thank my professors here. I got to thank my thesis committee, Mary. I got to thank John Dalton and Shane Seeley. Thank you, guys. I also have to thank all my colleagues here at Workshop. You guys are awesome. There's this proverb, and it goes, "As iron sharpens iron, one mind chisels another." And I got to say thank you, professors, thank you, colleagues, for chiseling my mind. And thank you for laughing. All right. I have some good news. Today, I published. I was expecting some applause. Let me qualify that. I self-published this T-shirt that I'm wearing. It says, I don't know if you can see it. During intermission, my T-shirt guy Brad will be selling these for $30 near the bar. So please help me out. I also have always wanted to do this. I've got a free T-shirt here. So, right side, make some noise. Right side. Can I get some noise from the left side? Oh. Nice. All right. The title of the story is Missing Things, and I wrote it for Nan. On the morning of Deborah Cross's 70th birthday, she flushed another bottle of yellow pills down the toilet. 500 milligram naproxen. Dr. Curtin said the pills would help her husband, Dan. He'll relax, Dr. Curtin said. And they did this by turning Dan into a zombie. On naproxen, his shoulders sagged, his frown deepened, and his eyes glassed over. All day he stared at the wall. He reminded Deborah of fruit rotting. She could see the depression pulling Dan into the grave. No, she would not stand for it. What do they call the worst medical school graduate? Answer, doctor. Deborah shucked Dr. Curtin's advice and flushed the prescription. Then she dresses Dan in a freshly pressed polo shirt. Of the 3 chain restaurants of the Del Mar Gardens retirement facility, she chose the Ruby Tuesdays for breakfast with her sister Iris. It's an ornately wood-trimmed room brimming with tables and booths. Iris, a condensed version of Deborah, both shorter and stouter, jabbers while her husband Joe, pointing an elbow, bites into a chicken leg, his false teeth like white shutters. You keep reliving your history, Iris says, her eyebrows holding acute angles. Deborah and Iris have the same silver perm. She says, so every day your mind works in different ways. It keeps the patients remembering. Iris is suggesting a state-of-the-art facility in Denver where dementia patients live in a sort of carousel. They walk a circular hallway lined with historical exhibits. The decades from 40s to 90s mark the hall like a timeline, and after the 90s it starts again with the 40s, making a continuous loop. Deborah tries to imagine her Dan, a retired carpenter, walking the loop. No way. Dan would be carrying his orange notepad around, making lists of things to fix, stirring up all sorts of trouble. Deborah chuckles and looks to Dan as if to share an inside joke. Thick white eyebrows curtain his blank stare. He pokes his fork into the quiche on his plate. Next to the plate lays the orange notepad. She has thought about sending Dan to the nursing home where someone else could wipe his ass and collect the corn pads that fall from his feet. But she has lived with Dan for so long, almost 60 years now, that any serious consideration fills her with sadness. "Come on, Deb," Iris says, looking at Dan. "You cannot exhaust yourself like you do." For a moment, Deborah considers telling Iris to mind her own damn business, but then Dan interrupts. "I didn't take my pills," Dan says. "What?" Iris asks. "I didn't take my pills," he says. His white brow flutters. "Yes, you did," Deborah says. "No, I didn't take my pills," Dan says. "Dan, I cannot remember for sure, but you probably took your pills." "I didn't take my pills, Deborah." "It's not like he would remember," Joe says to Iris, loud enough for Dan to hear. Dan gives Joe a severe look. "Don't say that," Iris says, out of breath. She is smothering a laugh. Quickly, white-headed Dan looks down at his fisted notepad. He releases his grip. He thumbs open the notepad. He flips a few pages. He finds something, a page which holds his attention. In palsied hands, he studies the page. Deborah pats his back, and beneath the cotton blue button-down, she feels tension. "Let's just have a nice lunch," she says. But something has already ignited Dan. His forehead vein throbs, his nostrils flare, his cheeks redden. Deborah knows it's time to leave, and Dan is now standing at the table, ignoring Deborah's pleas to sit down. He balls his fist, mean mugs Joe, and says, "You goddamn bastard." "Who are you talking to?" Joe asks. The chicken leg drops, plops on the plate. You worthless thieving bastard." Joe's eyeballs show white tops. He stutters, Who? His owl-like chest inflating, he asks, who do you think you're talking to?" Both men appear larger to Deborah. Dan dry spitting and Joe, the fat man, struggling to push himself vertical. Joe knees the table and rattles the ware, arresting the attention of adjacent tables. Everyone is now watching Joe and Dan, squaring off across a table, both seeming to swell. "I should have taken care of you a long time ago," Dan says. "Beat him," Joe says. "I'll beat him." Iris raises both arms as if to catch something and lets out an awkward shriek. Deborah pinches Dan's shirt. Before she knows it, she is also standing, holding Dan's shirt like a leash on a feral dog, trying to defuse Dan. She says, "This is not happening here. This is not happening here." Then Dan reaches over the table for Joe, and Deborah falls. She hits the floor. A beat later, the waiter is lifting her up. Dan is being bear-hugged by another waiter, a lineman-sized boy with arms as thick as legs. Pink-faced Dan looks like a pig in a blanket. Deborah moves to touch Dan's cheek. "Dan, it's okay. You're okay. We're okay." Her soothing tone sounds meant for a baby. Dan's expression changes from anger to confusion to fear. His bristling white brow lifts and his eyes stretch wide. He's a lost child. Deborah follows his fearful gaze through the restaurant window. Her heart swells and hurts in her chest. Outside, 3 stiff-moving old men walk the greens of the Delmar Gardens golf course, one wearing flannel pants, each looking behind, admiring their golf bags rolling on runners. The boy waiter discovers Dan has peed himself. That afternoon, Deborah hesitates to leave Dan alone in the condo, but her old friend Billy, who still has a license, a house, a job, called Deborah up out of the blue the week prior and said he had just moved to Dallas. She said it would be a nice birthday present to have lunch, and then Billy suggested one better. They should go to the Dallas Museum of Art. Deborah had read about a King Tut exhibit there. Deborah agreed, and it felt nice for her to have something to look forward to. She even rode the Delmar Gardens bus to Dillard's and bought a new outfit, tan summer slacks and a blue blouse. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asks Dan. Dan is sitting on the couch watching TV. "I'm fine," he says. "Are you sure you're okay with being alone a bit?" "I'm fine," he says. "I'll take a nap." For a moment, Deborah stands in the doorway, and she considers how Dan does not notice her outfit. The red lipstick, the rue-dappled cheeks, how good she looks. Long ago, she would have delighted in his jealous questioning. "Where are you going? With who? Is he married?" Today, Dan forgot her birthday. Tonight, Dan will not remember her leaving. It surprises her how easy it is to leave. Outside, the Sunday afternoon sky, like a great blue ocean, hangs high. Deborah steps out from under the terrace, and the sun forces her to squint. She sees a short man, and her stomach writhes. For the first time in a long time, she is nervous. Billy wears a fine blue suit and black tie and black suede shoes. His jet black hair slicks back. He leans against a rumbling red Chrysler 3000. He is dapper and poised. Deborah, being the type of person who, even if she has not seen a friend in a long time, still gives a hug, embraces Billy, and she forgets all the things she had thought to say and just holds her old friend, his head tucking beneath her chin. Both his shortness and musky cologne feel familiar to Deborah. "Let me see you," she says, gripping his shoulders. Billy flashes a shy yellow smile. With his hair dyed black, he looks a decade younger than he actually is. It baffles Deborah how smaller people seem to age so slowly. "I've waited a long time for this," Billy says. "Me too," Deborah says. "I've never been." They are on the interstate heading into downtown Dallas, and Deborah rolls down the window. The highway air blows hot on her face. She rolls it back up and turns on the radio to listen to a warbling George Strait. 5-story Dallas buildings whiz by one way. Car traffic whizzes by the other. Even though they are moving forward, the passing cars give Deborah the sense of sinking. Billy drives with his neck stooped and head ducked down low, so low he watches the road through spaces in the steering wheel. "If you start to drool, I'm taking your keys away," says Deborah. Billy laughs. Billy parks in an empty garage. He tells Deborah to wait. Then he gets out and ambles around the vehicle to open the passenger side door. What a gentleman. He jerks the handle and the door clunks back, unwilling to release. Deborah helps by lifting the handle and the car door opens. "I'm sorry," he says, helping Deborah stand. "Never use that door." His hand touches the exposed skin beneath her blue blouse. Warmth radiates from his touch. Inside the museum they walk, arms linked like an old couple. They shuffle, pausing at each painting so Billy can offer his interpretations. Billy points at an empty wall and says, "This reflects the empty slate of each person." They both laugh. When they see the King Tut exhibit, a dimly lit room filled with glass cases, Billy asks Deborah what she thinks of the 3,000-year-old boy mummy. She says, "He makes me feel young." The arthritis pinches in her knees, and Deborah tells Billy she needs to sit. They find a bench facing an abstract painting, 1,000 multicolored triangles on a mauve canvas. Billy says it is his favorite so far. It makes him think of the vibrancy of life. "There is so much to see," he says. Then Billy tells Deborah about Sarah. Since she died 2 years ago, colon cancer, he spends a lot of time thinking. He wants to see the world. He wants to take Deborah with him. He says, "I'm in love with you." Deborah is shocked. She makes an unattractive gargling sound. Maybe it is the mix of surprise and imagining romance at 70, which sounds ridiculous to Deborah. She asks, "Excuse me?" Billy's face wrinkles, his eyes, a soft and light blue, glowing around shrinking pupils in the brightly lit room, seek hers, causing his black lashes to lift. "Deborah, I'm in love with you. I've always been." His face, so close, seems to have finally arrived. "If you set something free and it comes back to you," he says, "then it's meant to be." Thank you.
Candace Henson's reputation was quickly established during her time in the MFA program, and from that moment forward, it had an impact on her teachers and her fellow students. As for her teachers, they either looked forward to the tasty treats she was said to bake and bring to class, or they trembled, expecting the Wicked Witch of the West. As for her fellow students, they all, I think, without exception, became her friends. For although she is an outspoken critic who does not mince words and is one of the fastest critics in the workshop classroom, she is also one of the fairest. Add to that her resilience and ability to get as good as she gives, and you have an exemplary workshop demeanor. To be fair, Candace comes by her candor honestly. Her thesis, titled Awful People, does not shy away from directness. Was there ever a more frightening word than egg beater? One poem asks, somewhat impishly. And when humor is needed to lighten the subject, we find that the pet beagle has eaten the plants. Yet when, as a child, the speaker breaks a lamp she had purchased for her mother at a yard sale, and some of the glass embedded in her arm is lovingly picked out by the mother and discarded, the speaker remarks, That's expensive glass. Don't waste it. And earlier, when proudly showing off her purchase to the dark male presence in the household, we hear his ominous, "This thing could do some damage," as he weighs it in his palm. It's the balance of things, knowing what they mean in each life, how to give them the proper weight in poetry, at which Candace excels. Weighing up losses is the ostensible subject of her thesis. Girlhood and sisterhood, virginity, the right to give or refuse permission to someone, pregnancies, all are lost in the poems of her thesis. Yet there's a sweetness intimated by Candace's magic touch with baked goods. I recently tasted a strawberry cake she baked for a fellow student's birthday. It was memorable. So, too, are the words of Candace's poetry, chatoyant, pedalavium, tarantulic. And so, too, is that very poignant sentiment at the center of much fine poetry that deals with awful people. The self is always the awfulest because it feels the most. Please welcome the disguisedly sweet Candace Henson.
So I know I'm supposed to start by saying thank you to my professors for inspiring me and all that jazz, but I'm going to take a little different approach. 2 years ago, I left my home and my mother, which was heartbreaking, in Pennsylvania to move to the Midwest, where I'd never been before, to start a program in a state I didn't think much of because they really don't teach us about the Midwest in Pennsylvania. We learn about the South and the East Coast because they're important, but Midwest, not really. So I didn't have any experience with Missouri. And I came here pretty sure I wasn't going to make friends and wasn't going to like anybody, and I was okay with that. But for those of you who have made this a home for me, for my friends, and for Steve and Shane, who let my newborn baby come to class for the last 11 weeks, thank you, guys. That meant a lot to me. Thank you for just making me not hate Missouri so much. Yeah. I'm actually not going to read poetry tonight because, as some of you may know, I don't like poetry readings. So I'm going to be reading a piece of nonfiction that I wrote, and it's titled, "I'm Not Superwoman, but I Am Pretty Awesome." And here we go. There are people calling you Superwoman, like girls who don't even take your class. I heard them in the MSc talking about it, how there's a teacher who had a baby and came back the next day to teach. All of this ass-kissing came from a student who will in all likelihood fail my class. She hasn't attended regularly, and when she does come, she spends most of her time texting. She even sits in the back, near the outlet, so she won't waste any battery while wasting time in my class. Technically, it was 5 days, I say, as she leaves the room, not listening. I'm not Superwoman. A, Superwoman isn't even a real superhero, and B, I've always been more of an X-Men kind of girl. I'd much rather be compared to Rogue, someone who can suck the life out of men with nothing more than my lips. That's real power. But I understand her point. The first week of the semester, 3 of my students asked me, on separate occasions, if my pregnancy meant they'd get a substitute teacher after I gave birth. When I told them no, they asked how the course would change when I switched it to an online course. I explained to them patiently, which was not easy, as I'm not a naturally patient person, that the course wouldn't be shifting to online and that I would be back immediately after having the baby. But what if you have a C-section? One of the girls said. Then I'll get a wheelchair, I said. What I gleaned from these discussions and the many others that followed during the early semester was that my students, like most people, view pregnancy as a kind of illness and childbirth as a kind of trauma. Last semester, one of my students wrote on his course evaluation that my pregnancy clearly interfered with my teaching as it made me moody and aggressive and unlikable. I shouldn't have been surprised and offended by these comments, but I was, namely because I was happier and nicer during my pregnancy than I've been in my entire life. What he didn't understand was that I'm a naturally aggressive and unlikable person. I've been called arrogant since I was 10 and bossy since I was 3. People don't like me much, and never have, and I've always been okay with that. What the student didn't realize was that if he'd had me as his teacher pre-pregnancy, his grade would have been a lot worse, because I wouldn't have had happy maternal hormones coursing through my body, demanding that I coddle my students and bump those Fs up to D+. There is a problem with the way we view childbirth and pregnancy and the way we teach our children to view it. The Hollywood version of pregnancy is always the same. A nice girl or woman suddenly transformed into an emotional wreck, complaining about how fat she is, how swollen her ankles are, how everything gives her heartburn, and how her boyfriend couldn't possibly understand the difficult time she's going through. And as if that weren't bad enough, the Hollywood view of childbirth is much worse and much more single-streamed. Pain. Scream-inducing pain that morphs women into monsters who require drugs in order to quell the beasts they've become. Women berating their partners because of their pain. Women telling their doctors to screw themselves. These are the scenes we see in movies. Juno, Knocked Up, What to Expect When You're Expecting. This is what we are taught in the fictional realm. And so-called reality TV isn't much better. The show A Baby Story has the same plot for each episode. A woman is rushed to the hospital to have her child. Her water breaks suddenly. Her pain is so intense that she screams at the camera zoomed on her scrunched face. She begs for an epidural. They tell her she has to wait. She begs some more. She cries. And finally, a doctor comes in and gives her the injection. And suddenly, she's docile. She can be controlled, moved into positions the nurses want her in. Drugs, we can see, are the only way women can be humane during birth. And this is what my students believe. And this is why they were in awe of me when I emailed them 4 hours after giving birth to tell them that, unfortunately, I'd have to cancel class for the day because I'd lost too much blood during delivery. This is why they couldn't believe that I was back in the classroom on Monday with their homework graded and returned to them, with a full lesson prepared, and expecting them to turn in their weekend homework. This is why the girls approached me in whispers, asking questions. Did it hurt? Did you want to die? Were you scared? Was it worth it? By the way, that's my baby. Would you do it again? I have told them my truth, the story of the way I gave birth, that it hurt some, but it was mostly pressure, a good kind of hurt, a kind of pain that meant something was happening. I never wanted to die. I didn't scream. I wasn't scared. I wasn't out of my mind. I wasn't telling my husband to fuck off. If anything, I'm troubled by the fact that I kept apologizing to him and to my midwives about all the amniotic fluid I kept leaking all over the floor, and about how long they'd been there, and about how I was really, really sorry I hadn't cleaned the kitchen before they came over. Those things probably didn't warrant apologies while my son was clawing his way out of my vagina. This was my birth experience, and I respect that it isn't the kind of birth experience most people have. Some people scream, and that's okay. And some people want medication, and that's okay. But what is not okay is for that to be the only truth, because the truth is, sometimes it's fun. I'm not Superwoman, but I am pretty awesome. I'm an excellent writer and student, and I'm not afraid to compliment myself. I was confident before I had my son that I'd be a great mother, and I am. Equally as important as my wicked awesome teaching and mothering skills, though, is the fact that I can teach my students about life. I have shown them that it is possible to nurse a baby and walk around a classroom and write on a chalkboard and teach the merits of the Oxford comma. See what I did there? I have demonstrated to all my students, but especially my female students, that it is possible to give birth without being traumatized. It is possible to work during the postpartum period. It is possible to refuse to be a victim of your body or a victim of the way people want your body to be. And most importantly, it is possible to function on no sleep. So I pulled an all-nighter isn't a valid excuse to miss my class. Thank you, guys.
Well, on that super heroic note, we'll retire to the dining hall and soon to return for the second half of the evening. Thank you.